and welcome to the Jerusalem Connection Red Alert Report for February 9. I'm Amy Zawi, and today we continue our conversation with special guest Joel Rosenberg. Join us today for part 2 of our discussion about anti-Semitism and why Christians are obligated to support and advocate for Jews and Israel.
While we're a large group, right, the vast majority of evangelicals are pro-Israel and love the Jewish people, and that's out of a world of some 600 million evangelical Christians worldwide. But if you expand the aperture to other sectors of Christendom, mainline liberal theology in the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, some of it, Lutheran Church, Roman Catholic Church, other sectors, you're finding people who have absolutely no interest or very little theological connection and commitment to Israel, and that has led to flawed theology. I mean, bad theology leads to bad actions, and this is a problem. So educating the Christian community is a critical task and cannot be underestimated.
I agree, and I follow that that thread in our organization and our news alerts, because I am seeing that even among Christian schools in America, Christian high schools and Christian universities, Christian colleges, there's that element of the BDS movement, for example, the boycott, divest, and sanction. There's the Students for Justice in Palestine are getting a foothold in some of the Christian campuses, and I always see that as such a dichotomy, because knowing what you and I know about the scripture and the debt and the obligation we have to Jews, I don't see how that can be reconciled on campus, and it drives me crazy, and I don't know how to change it. I just report on it so that people who have kids there or are sending kids there or are alum can maybe have some influence.
So here's an interesting point. In December, a fascinating but disturbing new poll came out, conducted or commissioned, let's say, by the Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem. That's a group of Christian scholars and seminary presidents and professors and academics and people like me and others who founded this organization, Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem, to help this process of educating the Christian world what's really going on. And they released a poll, which is really quite fascinating. And again, you can find all those poll results at allisrael.com, which is All Israel News. And you can Google in just Joel Rosenberg, young people, or young evangelicals, Israel poll. Anyway, the short version is we're seeing a collapse, certainly a drift, but it's getting close to a collapse of young evangelical support for Israel and understanding God's heart for Israel compared to their parents and grandparents. Why? Well, one of the last of the 6 articles I did on this in this series of columns looked at, well, there is hope, but the reasons, I went through the reasons for this drift heading into a collapse in part 5, and then the reasons for hope were part 6. So I commend those to you and your colleagues.
We will post those links so folks can review. Absolutely.
Great. So I make several points, and we can spend as little or as much time as you want on them, but they are important in this context. The main reason that young people are not getting it is because parents and grandparents who do get it aren't really passing it on. Okay. They're assuming that their kids and grandkids are inculcating the same values and the same understanding of the Bible that they have. Now we're seeing that across the board, right? Now, where is that coming from? Young people's view of marriage is really different, of sexuality, of gender, of the gospel, lots of issues. We're really in trouble with our young people. Why? And part of it is because we as parents and grandparents aren't doing a good enough job transmitting it. I'm not saying that as to be judgmental. I'm just saying it's our responsibility, Deuteronomy chapter 6 all the way through, but we're not doing such a great job. One of the reasons, Amy, that we're not doing a good job is because we are outsourcing these theological and historical issues to church. Now, even if you go to a good church, even if you go to a very pro-Israel church who really gets it theologically, and the pastor and the team at the top totally get it in their souls, it's very possible that if they're preaching this wonderfully from the pulpit as they work their way through the scriptures, your kid, I'm not yours, but our kids and grandkids aren't going to the service.
Right.
They're going to Sunday school. And in Sunday school, none of that might be communicated because it tends to be more topical, and dealing with Israel issues is not usually the topic that young pastors, youth pastors, and Sunday school teachers think of. You go to a youth conference, Israel's not likely to come up. You go to youth group, Sunday school. It's so you could be going to a great church
and still miss that element.
It from the front, it's not getting into the kids. So then you might be sending your kids to a wonderful Christian school, but they're covering lots of academics, and Israel is not necessarily part of their curriculum as an intentional focus. You could be sending them to a wonderful Christian college. I was just with the leadership of a major American Christian university, and I spent time with the top leadership. And I asked them, I said, I know that your school was founded on being super pro-Israel. That's how you're known. But I'm just curious, do you know what your students think now? And are you systematically, do you have a plan that over 4 years for undergraduates and 2 years for graduates, that they're getting an understanding of God's heart for Israel and the Jewish people? And the leadership at multiple levels was like, no, actually, we are thinking of ourselves as pro-Israel, but that doesn't mean we're programming and educating through this. So I'll wrap up with, we could go into more. There's a lot of this type of piece, but the key biblical text is this, Amy. When we look at the Apostle Paul speaking to the church in Rome, we look at Romans chapter 10, and what's interesting is he speaks about the gospel, but he lays out a very interesting principle. He says, how are they going to believe and how can they call on the name of Jesus as the Messiah if they've never even heard the message? Well, how can they hear the message and believe it if no one's ever told them? And how can someone tell them unless they're sent to tell them, and so forth? Now, that's true of the gospel, but I would argue it's true of every biblical doctrine. How can someone believe it and say, yes, I'm in, if they've not heard it? And if no one's teaching them, even in the home, at the church, in the youth group, Sunday school, at their Christian school, high school, in the Christian college, they could go through all of that. Hopefully they're still a believer or wonderful, but they may not have any idea why Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the nation of Israel and the Jewish people are important at all. I mean, you could miss the whole story. And that's in churches and Christian schools and colleges that do believe it. Now you have other swaths of evangelicalism. Let's set aside Roman Catholicism and others. Large swaths of evangelicalism that have basically reduced to the biblical narrative to this: creation, fall, redemption, restoration, and the eternal kingdom. Now that's not wrong. That's all true. But you've just removed the entire story of the nation of Israel. Abraham's gone, and with it his covenant. Isaac is gone, Jacob is gone, Israel's gone. You've basically skipped about 85 to 90% of the Old Testament and gone right into the New Testament and not even dealt with why is our modern Bible, why is the Bible so filled with the story of Israel? And by Israel, I mean also the Jewish people in exile, in wherever.
And then you have to ask, why is
not just the political state of Israel?
So much of the Bible dedicated to that? Why do the Pope Christian theology seminaries and the pulpit ignore it. And that's the other question.
Oh, right. So there's a lot of reasons why our young people aren't getting it. And therefore, I'm not saying the young people are becoming all anti-Semites. I want to be clear. What I'm saying is that they aren't necessarily thinking, oh, the Jews are special people that need special love. We all need to love everybody, but the Jews have a special place in God's heart. Even that concept sounds a little odd to a lot of young evangelicals today, because they think it seems unfair.
Right.
But the Bible is clear. We're not special to God because of us. We're special to God because he sovereignly chose us and decided, I'm going to reveal myself and my divine qualities and my character and my plan through this one particular people. He could have picked the Japanese. He could have picked the Brazilians, right? But he chose the Hebrew people of Mesopotamia, Abraham's family. And they weren't even Jews yet until we get to Judah, the son of Jacob. But they're the nation of Israel. So my point is, God has said, I have set this people apart. He calls us his chosen people. He says that Israel, meaning the nation of the Jewish people, is the apple of his eye, like the pupil, like a really super sensitive part that you would protect at all costs. This is the language. He calls himself the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he sends his Messiah, his only begotten son, not to Portugal, not to Italy, not to Kurdistan, all important places that I love. God sends his son to Israel as a Jew to speak to Jews, not only to Jews, but primarily to Jews at first. Why do I say it? I say it because when you see just those few points, you would realize, wow, if our young people have to understand that God is treating the Jewish people separately and differently and uniquely and with this beloved attitude, right? Jeremiah, God speaks to Jeremiah and he says to the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Now it's true that God loves the whole world. That's John 3:16, but God is specifically speaking to one particular people group and saying, I do love you. It's not more than everybody else, but it's unique.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the biblical obligation to the nation of Israel and to the Jewish people comes from, because the enemies of Israel are trying, and the Jewish people are trying to kill us, attack us, annihilate us. And God's saying, Satan is trying to attack because I have uniquely chosen them. So has he. Mm-hmm. And so this is really critical. I know our time is wrapping up, but I think these theological points are so critical for parents, grandparents, and educators. So they can start thinking, if I ignore this issue, I'm really ignoring a large theme in the Bible, both Old and New Testaments. And if I do that, I'm ignoring a major promise in Genesis 12, which is God saying about his people, I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you, I will curse. So it's not only that you are missing something, it's not only something that you may not be sensitive to quickly defending a Jewish person or community in a moment of danger. It's not just that you might start inculcating wrong or anti-Semitic values yourself, even as a so-called professed Christian. It's that you're missing a blessing.
Right.
And that's terrible, because that's a big deal. That's from the first chapters of Genesis. Like that, I don't know exactly all that is encompassed in being blessed by God, but I don't want to miss it. Right. I don't want our young people or anybody to miss it either.
So those are extremely great insights, and we are going to share your resources to our network I'll put the tags in so that folks can see. And we will continue to follow your good work. And perhaps we can have you on again for a follow-up to continue talking about these topics.
Well, thank you very much, Amy. And I'll just end with this one thought, and that is I wrote a novel a number of years ago called The Auschwitz Escape. It's a historical thriller. It is fiction, but it's inspired by a series of true stories.
Okay.
One of which was the actual escape from the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp of 4 Jewish men in the spring of 1944, not just to save their own lives, but to tell the Jewish community in Hungary, which had not yet been arrested and deported and sent to the death camps, not to get on the trains. What was really happening inside Auschwitz? We now know how the horrors of what was happening in Auschwitz, but the Jewish community in Europe at the time did not know. Yeah. These men escaped in order to, not only to save their own lives, to warn the Jewish communities, and to get the message to Churchill and Roosevelt: either liberate this camp or bomb us out of existence, but don't let any other Jewish people go there. It's a fascinating story, the true story, and trying to dramatize it and bring it alive. I talked to the top leadership at Yad Vashem, the main Holocaust memorial and museum and research center here in Israel, in Jerusalem. And I said, is it acceptable to write fiction to try to help bring this, to help people feel emotionally what the story is? And they said, yes, you have to be careful. But they read the manuscript, they approved it.
Oh, good.
With some suggestions, which I accepted. And that is the only piece of historical fiction I've ever written, but it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating. And it also tells the story of a Christian community, an evangelical community in France, in a little town called Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, in which they were on a train line coming out of Germany, and Jews were sneaking onto that train and then jumping off in Le Chambon. And these evangelical pastors realized what was happening and decided to mobilize their entire town of 3,000 to protect and rescue these Jews from the Holocaust. They ended up saving more than 5,000 people. Wow. And eventually, the pastors were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Most of them lived. I believe one of them died in one of the camps. But when the war was all over and years passed and the story got told, not only the state of France, but the state of Israel awarded the entire village, as well as the pastors, righteous Gentile status.
Wow.
And there are some older, hard to, out of print, hard to find nonfiction books about it, even a French language documentary. But the Auschwitz Escape as a novel sort of brings these stories
brings it to life.
And this was one of my ways of saying, how do I help the next generation that didn't grow up? It's been 30 years or so since Schindler's List. It's been a long time since these major films or books are out there. What little part can I do to try to get to tell a story that leads people to the truth and shows how a Christian community might risk their very lives to defend Jews they don't even know, much less that don't even agree with their theology.
Right. Oh, I'm excited to read that one, and I will post the link of that cover so our viewers can find it too and purchase it. But thank you so much, Joel, for your time. I know you had a hard stop, and we appreciate your being with us, and I hope we can talk again soon. And again, we will be sharing your resources with our network so that they continue to be educated and then activate their faith and their obligation.
My pleasure, Amy. Thank you, and God bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Shavua Tov.